Alright, hello again to anyone watching these Kaijudo videos. Today I am bringing the first video that will kick off kind of the coverage for the Kaijudo tournament that I'm hosting. Unfortunately, I tried to record this video with Andros and we did an hour-long discussion, but there were a lot of issues with the recording, so unfortunately I had to scrap that, and I'm just going to try to do my best to talk about the decks on my own. So I'm going to run through the 6 decks that people brought to this tournament, and then maybe give a prediction. So, like just mentioned, we only had 6 people enter this time, which was a bit unfortunate. We had some people that had to kind of drop out, but it's a busy time for some folks, understandably. So we decided to do a round robin event this time around, which means it's going to be pretty lengthy. Everyone's going to play 5 rounds, once against each other player in the event, which means we're going to get a lot of matches, and hopefully I can cover a decent amount of them, get a large array of matchups as well. And we've got 6 different decks in the event, and most of them have a lot of pretty distinct differences, so it'll be kind of cool to see. I'll run through them, I guess, quickly, but one of the big things to note is there's not any piercing judgments in this tournament, which is kind of crazy, as me and Andros talked about in the previous videos, how one of the big patterns was the success of piercing judgment decks, and this time around everyone kind of brought something that they seem to want to try, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes. So kicking off, we have Andros with light dark midrange. So he is playing kind of similar to a light dark Kalima list, except without the Kalimas. Just straight up Agrics, Serpents, kind of that standard format deck, except obviously it's kicking in with a couple copies of Lyra, Stormspark Blast, and then Vang being a huge addition from I, which is a really, really nice card that'll get some use here. So this kind of deck is pretty positioned to do reasonably well against some of the more aggressive decks, I suppose. You have the really nice package that I really appreciate of the 3 Mesmerize, 3 Spire Puppets in a 40 card list. You have Keeper of Laws to kind of attack the control decks. I'm not sure if it's quite enough. His plan, obviously, you've got instead of Targusher, you have Lost Patrol, which also helps sort of against control decks, because Targusher is not really a great way to apply pressure. Whereas if you kind of build out a board with Lost Patrols and Keeper of Laws, that's a better way to kind of attack through Aqua Striders, make those kind of irrelevant, and then put on some pressure, back it up into a 6-drop, and then you can kind of refuel with an Agrics against control decks, and then rebuying Keeper of Laws with an Agrics is a really powerful play. You have Trox and the Storm Sparks is a little bit of a way to play through Haven, but you don't have a lot of Slayers with just the one Underworld Stalker and no Targushers, so it can be a little bit iffy against control decks in that sense as well, because one of the ways you can kind of Agrics can be a really sticky card sometimes against control, and when you have those Slayers, it makes Haven less of an issue. Even though obviously Haven is still going to be a pretty big problem for this kind of deck. You have some ways to play through it, but with just the Skull Cutters, it's a little bit harder for that game plan to kind of grind out. Without the Klimas, it's a little bit harder to kind of push through. But definitely this looks to be a deck that's targeted more against other lower curve decks. And also interesting is not playing maybe a copy or 2 of Andromeda, just capping off at Agrics and really going hard on the 6-drops. But overall, just lots of good cards in this list. Foregoing the Chimera package 2, just the one of Screeching, which is just a nice card. But I don't know. It'll be a nice deck to see how it plays. It's got some blockers. It's a pretty... it's kind of classic mid-range, where it's got some tools for a lot of different things. It's just going to be a matter of, do you see the right cards for the right matchups? It's a little bit light on Shield Blast. Especially Stormspark can be kind of a situational, conditional one. So it can be a little iffy in the defensive axis, I would imagine, in some spots. But it's leaning really hard on the discard spells. Those cards can be really powerful when you draw them. But I can go a little bit more in depth on the specific matchups for the event a little bit later. But overall, just a really solid list and a nice take on a kind of a lean mid-range deck. So next up, we have Gareth playing Mono Nature. Gareth happens to be my brother, who decided to join last minute so that we could get an even number of players, which was Very nice of him to do so. He brought Mono Nature, uh, which is a deck I know he's kind of a fan of. He likes to play it when he plays the occasional Kaijudo that he does. And he brought pretty much the list that I profiled on the channel way back, a couple years ago almost, which is kind of crazy. Which is just the version that I'd been playing for a while, where I sort of moved away, lowered the curve a lot, and then have the full 6 1-drops. Chief Many Tribes is another 2-drop, which I think is actually just a really good card. It's kind of high variance sometimes, but it lets you just play a different game plan where you can just gain so much advantage, which is already the game plan Mono Nature kind of wants to do already, and then it just lets you kind of be a little more passive. You can build up a board, generate bait for your creatures without losing any kind of card advantage, and it just plays into that really well. It is definitely just like a weak way to apply pressure, so that kind of weakens the early game of this deck, especially in certain matchups. And also having like the 6 1-drop package can also do that as well, where it's not amazing. Your early game is maybe weakened, but at the same time, I mean, cutting out stuff like Muktak, and all you're really doing at that point is like just trading out a bunch of other 2-drops for different ones. It's not the most major change, but this list can be a little bit clunky. 12 evos is a lot, but I mean, it's a Mono Nature overall is a concept that's kind of proven to work. And as we'll see in the metagame as well, like one of the issues I have is like only 3 artichokes can be a bit of a liability, but I think in this field, as we'll see when we cover the next 4 decks as well, and even Andros that we've already seen, I think just having the artichokes probably won't come back to bite him. The 1 Gigahorn is something else that I liked. Just basically an extra copy of Broodmother helps to find Boulder Fist reliably as well, which can be a really nice setup in certain matchups where you have like an Anjak with access to a Gigahorn, and it just makes it really hard for your opponent. It gives you a level of inevitability almost, or just kind of a really easy access to that trump card. But overall, I like this list. I'm not really I would probably need someone else to really try it out to see if this kind of approach is actually worth it. It's not something like I'm kind of attached to it since I built it, but I'm not really sure. I'm not confident that it would be like better than the old builds that I could make that statement, but I think it is personally, but we'll see how it performs. The one thing is my brother is probably, of the 6 players in this event, probably the one who's played, I want to say by far, and that's probably accurate, by far the least amount of Kaijudo, so we'll see how he does. We will see. Next up, we have Darksteiner's deck, and he chose to bring Water, Fire, Nature, Regeneration, which is a deck that he's definitely put a ton of work into. Just a lot of his, from what I understand, a lot of his play in Kaijudo has been experimenting with Corrupteds and I guess by extension Wild Veggies, and just putting a lot of time in just trying out different things. And this is sort of the list that he settled on off after a lot of that time. Basically just deciding that veggieless veggies was the way to go for him. Like the initial Corrupted builds, like splashing for Squillis Scourge, or not Squillis, Vicious Squillis, just not really worth it, which I think I agree with. And then just kind of wanting to be, like, you don't want to support a full fire section for Blitz Commando either. So basically just going Water, Nature, splashing the fire cards just for that swift regeneration closing power made the most sense for him. And then trying veggies, I think he felt that the deck was a lot more bricky that way. Like Cornucopia, Ninja Pumpkin, those kinds of cards can be pretty high rolly and almost win more in a sense, which to some extent I agree with. I think the veggies give you a higher ceiling, which I think is definitely valuable. But it's kind of one of those things where it sort of depends on the metagame whether you need that extra ceiling or whether you want to raise the floor of the deck. And I don't think I'm on board outright saying that this deck is like straight up better than veggies, but Darksteiner would probably say that. But I don't want to speak for him too much here. But I think the key for this list, though, and the big innovation was just cutting tricky turnips for logo scan, which sounds really weird, but logo scan just helps you play into what matters. And the reality is when you play this deck, at least if your brain's turned on, you sort of realize that like Tricky Turn Up is just worse than every 2-drop that's in the list. Even Aqua Trickster, funnily enough, like it's just worse than all of these 2-drops. So it's not really a necessary card. Even if you're playing veggies, I don't think you even necessarily need it. It's not like a Sacred Cow or anything. Like you can just cut that card. And I think Logos just adds a dimension to the deck in a few directions that's really important. Like being able to bridge the gap to find Bad Apple is basically, I mean, this deck, the other thing when you play this, and even veggies, when I've played veggies, you realize like the cornucopia is not really the thing that's going on. The deck revolves around Bad Apple. That is the single most important card, and then the two powerful payoffs are Finbar and Swift Regeneration. Those 3 cards are basically that's the trinity. That's like the center of the deck, and those are the cards that matter. Like Finbar is one of the best mid-game payoffs, or is the best mid-game payoff. Swift Regeneration is the best finisher. And Cornucopia is kind of just a tertiary card to that equation, even in the veggie deck itself. So I don't think by any means you need the veggie package for, like, that's not like a crucial part of the deck. Again, I think adding a small veggie package, which is something I've experimented with a list similar to this, can add a bit of ceiling, but also adds a little bit of some risk of ruin when you go that approach as well. But I think, yeah, Logos just really fills the gap where it just helps you find the Bad Apple, where like when you draw Bad Apple, your deck's amazing. When you don't draw Bad Apple, it's kind of bad. And that's where the Seneschal comes in as well. Just maxing out on those gives you like a kind of backup plan. The problem I have with Seneschal though is it's a pretty weak backup plan unless you're playing matchups against weaker decks. I think when you're playing against some of the stronger decks in Kaijudo, I don't really think Seneschal does a very good Bad Apple impression. Whereas when you're playing against weaker decks in Kaijudo, it can. And so yeah, in general, I'm not as big a fan of Seneschal. But still, it just kind of works to just double down on, or give you some redundancy on that powerful 4-drop. And Logo Scan just kind of bridges the gap where it helps you find those powerful 4-drops. And then once you're going, this deck just generates a ton of advantage. And then the other big thing that Darksteiner did as well was just go way up on Blast, which is something that a lot of the veggie decks, my own included, had always been kind of skimping on. I don't know if you need the full 9. I think the full 9 is kind of bricky as well. You could definitely, I think like 6 or 7 is probably the sweet spot. Like if you wanted to change some cards around, you could definitely go down to like 2 copies of each. Tendril is amazing in this deck. It's just like actively ramping yourself is like actually just insanely good for you a lot of the time, even if you're losing your board presence. And then Root Trap is just really crucial, nice card to have to answer something like Infernacy Awakened, or even get an Andromeda out of the way so you don't get Ostriked into Oblivion, because Ostrike kind of really reduces the impact of something like a Swift Regeneration. I guess I should say as well, Logos also being water is just really nice too, because this deck wants a high water count, which is another reason as well to max out Seneschal, because like it's not just enough that you have the right amount of, or the required amount of cards so that you can consistently cast something like a Renegade on turn 2, right? You don't want just like, I have my, I don't know off the top of my head, but I have like the 12 or 13 water cards so that I can consistently cast my Bronze Arm Tribe or my Bronze Arm Renegade on turn 2. But you need kind of more than that, because you don't want to just have a water source to cast your Renegade, because this deck is so reliant on Bad Apple. Bad Apple you almost never want to charge, like unless you have 2, and even then you probably don't want to charge them. You'd rather hold on to them, because the draws when you have double Bad Apple are just ridiculous. So this is almost like the Bad Apple is almost not a source of mana. Like it's probably one of the cards you almost never want to charge. So that's almost discounted from those calculations. And on top of that, like when you draw Renegade, this is one of probably your best 2-drop early overall, and you really want to draw that and be able to cast it. So if you ever draw Renegade and Bad Apple, you want to be able to cast both, which means you need kind of like a 3rd water card in your hand. So it's not just looking to make sure you have the minimum requirement to cast a 2-drop and then the minimum requirement to cast a 4-drop and being done with that. You kind of want even higher water count so that you can support casting both in the same curve. So just upping the water count even higher helps you do that more often. Also, being able to cast something like Logo Scan into Bad Apple, for example, like there's a lot of reasons to want a lot of water mana. And that's another reason why Tricky Turnip kind of contributed to the clunkiness of the deck. Like, it was just another nature card, a 3-drop that wasn't really necessary, wasn't doing anything particularly well. Like, obviously, when you buff it with Cornucopia and the Veggie list, that can be nice sometimes, but even still, I think Logos is just a better card for the deck, helping it achieve its kind of game plan. But, yeah, I guess that's kind of a deep dive on the deck, but... yeah, nice list overall. Played against it and with it a fair amount at this point, and I think it's a pretty solid deck. We can go on to the next one. So Louis, back again. He played a couple, I think, he played a control deck in one of the first events, like a mid-rangey control-y Water Dark Fire, and he's kind of played Dragons the last one, and this time he circled back to a control deck, but this time he's got the light for Havens and Andromeda, so I believe he's playing 47 cards, and got a lot of good stuff. I mean, he's got like the Mesmerized Spire Puppet package, he's got the Ramp package, Sprout and Reap and Sow, Full Metal Lemons, and the kind of an interesting Blast lineup as well, with Arbiters and Kios as kind of like some of the creature triggers, which just obviously they help against Scamp. Unfortunately, I don't think there's any Scamps in the field, so Keo is maybe not the strongest card when given that's the case, but still, you need some fire mana, and I guess it's one of the better Fire Shield Blasts that you could choose. Yeah, Major Owl, just a solid fire card. The one Awakened, pretty interesting that he's kind of low on top end for one of these control decks. A lot of people load up super heavy, but he's just got 2 Andromeda, 2 Haven, 1 Awakened, which makes his deck a little bit leaner, which is nice to see. But he's also got the Sprite's Gift, which kind of functions as extra copies, and then is just a little bit more of a versatile card, right? Because it can, in the late game, it can function as like, it can basically operate almost like a crystal memory, but instead of tutoring your deck, it tutors your mana zone, which is still really powerful. Like, it just adds a level of cohesion to your control deck where you can kind of afford to charge some crucial cards early. You maybe don't have to play as many of those crucial late game cards because Sprite's Gift can kind of just operate as that. While you have an abundance of mana in the late game, is just a really versatile card because it can buy back your Storm Spark or your Absolute Incineration, or it can just be another copy of those bombs. It can also just counteract people that are trying to like root trap your Awaken, and then you can just rebuy it, which is pretty sweet. So yeah, pretty lean list overall. Yeah, just a lot of removal spells and then blockers. Ironwell Tree is another card that I like. I mean, just good stuff, basically. Pretty solid list. I'm not sure if there's any crazy omissions. He's not playing Vang, which is fair. I don't know if Louis has played much. I don't think he's played much at all with many of the I cards, and I believe he's just kind of testing out the decks that he has in paper, which is, I think, what most people, like myself included, have done. Not everyone's really ventured too far into the I space, even though we've done a few tournaments with it. But overall, just a pretty solid list. No complaints. I guess like random things that you could, I mean, there's a lot of directions to go, a lot of one-ofs that you could play in these kind of control decks, but I guess those one-ofs kind of lose a little bit of value when you don't have like Crystal Memory. Like playing one Skull Shatter, especially if you're not expecting many control mirrors, is probably not that great. Playing like, I mean, there's a lot of one-ofs you could fit into these decks. There's a lot of random stuff you can throw into pile, right? But I like overall the lean list. So it's nice to see. I guess the next deck going is Alpha 5, who brought I think the heaviest deck in the event, a 51 card Water Dark Nature control deck. This list is, I guess, pretty interesting. Lots of like creature-based ramp in this one. So he's got like all of the Bloom Wardens, Goop Strikers, Johnny Darkseid package, Bronze Arm Tribe even over Reap and Sow. So definitely favoring a little bit more of the creature-based stuff. And then going for the kind of Kurugar win condition alongside those. So that kind of reinforces, or that makes sense why he would choose to play Bronze Arm Tribe in that case. And it's an interesting way to go about it. I think he's got a lot of like just good stuff, right? Like just ramp, shield blast, removal, discard. Like that's basically the recipe for decent enough control tools. And then I just think like the win condition itself, in my opinion, is just suboptimal. But I mean that's kind of to be expected when you choose not to play light. Like I think Kurgar, I don't think there's any debate that it's just not going to be as strong of a win condition. And it's going to be a lot more high rolly, especially in this kind of list than something like Haven or Andromeda or the combination of those two. Because like when you're playing so many spells, even though he's got a decent number of cards that can kind of trigger it multiple times in a turn even, it's still, you're going to be kind of reliant on having some good flips off of your Kurgar over the first couple turns, and you have to untap with it too. So it's kind of a little bit looking to high roll with that, but when it does work, you can probably turn the corner pretty quick. And again, overall, like as long as he can stabilize, like, which is a little bit harder to do when you don't have Andromeda and Haven, obviously. But as long as he can stabilize, I mean, he's got enough tools to probably be able to do that somewhat reliably. But I guess I can break down some of the matchups a little more. I think probably leaning a little bit too hard on Mesmerize for my liking. Like it's by far his best early game card. And with only 3 in a 51 card deck, I think he's going to be leaning pretty hard on drawing that early. The Tivsters, they look a little questionable to me, I'm not going to lie. It would make more sense if he had some other ways to utilize them, but just being like a way to something to sack off for Darkseid probably isn't enough. Just being like a bait for Omgoth as well, probably not enough. The Agorix also looks a little questionable. Like it's obviously kind of disynergist with the Goop Strikers and Bloom Wardens when that's a lot of your early game. But at the same time, even just like if you can trade off with, I mean, trade off is a little ambitious with the Bronze Arm Tribe, but even if you can just like randomly just chump attack this into one of your opponent's tap creatures, and then late game you play your Agorix and then just rebuy like a Grudge Weaver and a Bronze Arm Tribe, and then you can get a decent bit of value out of this. But I would probably just play this as a one of, if anything. It still looks a little questionable. If he had Vangs or something like that, maybe it would make more sense. Or I don't know. I think it's not doing too much in this deck, but I mean, Agorix is still a fine card. If you ever rebuy anything, it gets you a decent amount of value. Rebuying Cephalia, which is another kind of odd inclusion to me. I don't know if he's going to be able to really support like an aggressive beatdown plan, like just trying to take the aggro against like other controls and try to back it up with like a Cephalia. I'm not really sure if he can properly do that. Seems a little questionable to me. So aside from that, it's probably just, I mean, it's still fine, right? If you just play it as like a mid-rangey draw 2, like the floor is probably high enough that it's just a decent mid-game card as a draw option. But I don't know why you would choose, like, no, I mean, it makes sense. Maybe it's a little more cohesive with the deck. Like if you're going to play Agorix and Kurgar, that's a reason enough to want to lower the spell count, which is why I guess you wouldn't go with like more copies of Memory or Logo Scan instead. Like you would pick a creature draw option. But still, I mean, it looks odd, but it probably plays better than it looks, because Cephalia is just a very strong card in general. And maybe he's thinking of using it as well as like a kind of counter tool to someone who's playing Reverberate, where you can just, if they Reverberate and draw 6, then you can Cephalia and draw maybe 4 or 5 back and then maintain parity that way. So that makes sense to me. Like it probably plays a lot better, even though it doesn't look like it matches the archetype. Absolute Darkness, also like a really powerful card, specifically against the Darksteiner deck that we saw earlier. I mean, if he's Swift Regenerationing, Absolute Darkness is one of the best counters to that, where you can just wipe the board, especially because, I mean, Darksteiner's creatures are all below 6k power, so it's going to board wipe pretty much every time. But the one issue, though, is that it's not the best. Like, it's not always going to work that well, because, I mean, if you're relying on that darkness to stabilize you, usually the turn Darksteiner's deck will regeneration. They're not just regenerationing and then doing nothing. Like, they usually gain back advantage, because there's probably a Finbar, there's probably a Seneschal, or probably a Bad Apple, and that usually generates a bunch of advantage back. They'll usually have like a second regeneration or some kind of blitz plus a bunch of creatures from hand, and once that train starts going with this deck, like they'll just play with like 10 mana and like 8 cards in hand, and it's just kind of ridiculous. And they can just keep up the onslaught pretty easy. So like even one darkness it might not even be enough in some spots, but it's still a good stabilization tool. So yeah, overall, I want to say this deck is not that great, but I think it's still got a lot of the tools. I could easily see it doing well. Just because, again, like decent early game cards, good shield blast and interaction with mesmerize, all that kind of stuff. Good card advantage option, or reasonable card advantage options, I should say. Yeah, I mean that's a recipe enough. Like if you can stabilize and then it's got I think again a suboptimal late game plan, but it's still a late game plan, and if you can get there, it can do some stuff. So yeah, I don't think it's like a terrible deck by any means. It definitely looks bad, but it probably plays better. Not to be too harsh, but it probably plays a lot better than it looks. So I wouldn't be surprised if it like went on a run and was actually favored against some of these control deck, other like Haven decks even. But yeah. The final deck is my own, which is Light Nature Ramp. So went with 43 cards and then just pretty linear. I didn't put too much time into preparation, or at least too much time into agonizing over deck choice this time around. Usually I'm just debating and I don't know what deck I want to play, because usually I want to try like 5 different decks and I'm really not sure which one I want to do, and then balancing that with like what I want to play and what I think will do well is like always tough. And then I don't know, this time around I was like more occupied playing drafting MTG Arena, so I decided pretty early on that I just play something linear, and I was like picking between a rush deck or Light Nature Ramp, and I decided to go with the ramp deck. Yeah, like I said, super linear. Initially my builds were like 40 cards with minus a Storm Spark and Arbiter and minus the Mana Storm, but I was really deliberating like how I wanted to round out my deck, and I really wasn't sure on like Shield Blast count, like which I wanted, because I wanted like some creature triggers, and I was debating between like Artichokes, which I had in the list before, which I cut for Root Traps, but then I wanted like a third Arbiter. I was finding reasons to want like a third Storm Spark, but I wasn't really sure. I didn't want to cut too many nature cards. I didn't want to cut my Tendril Grasps. I didn't want to cut my top end, and I really liked the third Lyra, so I just wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with the Shield Blast count. So I just decided to add the Shield Blast and go up to 3 of each. And then because I added a couple more Shield Blasts, I felt I kind of diluted the deck by adding 2 more light cards, 2 more Shield Blasts. So I wanted to keep the ratios somewhat to what they were previous, so I just added a Mana Storm as like an extra ramp card. So I just went up to 43, which I kind of regret after seeing like 4 or 3 mesmerized decks in the field. Diluting my deck to where like I see my Iron Will tree less often is going to be kind of punishing. So I'm kind of regretting that, especially as well like adding 2 more Shield Blasts in a field with not so many aggressive decks, especially when most of my Shield Blasts don't line up that well against Mono Nature. They're all kind of mediocre in that matchup. That's kind of punishing, but they are decent against Darksteiner's deck. But yeah, I don't know if I love the choice. I was also really debating between like some of my builds. I was thinking of also just adding 2 Laws instead of the 2 Shield Blasts, but I wasn't really sure, because like the precedent so far has been usually there's been some amount of mid-rangey stuff, but this time our field was some players that I felt like were more likely to play like Piercing Judgment decks and things like of that nature, so I didn't really feel confident in adding Keeper of Laws, but in hindsight I probably would have preferred that over the 2 Shield Blasts for this field, but I don't know. I think the linearity of this deck could probably hurt it in some of these control matchups. Like obviously I have like the heaviest late game with like triple Andromeda, triple Cast, triple Haven, compared to like Louis' deck, for example, which is just like the 5 plus the Sprites gift. So I can really like out creature him, but he can also like easily answer with like way cheaper cards like Spire Puppet and Mesmerize can come down pretty easily. interact with those win conditions and really run me out of them, and he might have a little more, his win conditions might be more easy to resolve that way. I don't know. I think the linearity of this deck can definitely come back to bite it, which is something I'm kind of worried about, because like you can just, if you just mesmerize a couple havens and then just start pitting away my Cassiopeias, and then he resolves his own havens, like it just can be kind of tough when you, because like the plan of just like dropping giant cards every turn is like kind of strong, because obviously these cards are ridiculously powerful, but at the same time, like if sometimes like just a giant 10 mana card is still just one giant 10 mana card, and it's might be worse than someone just playing like 2 or 3 cheaper cards in a turn, like someone going like Spire Puppet plus like Terra Pit your dude, or I don't know, things like that. Like they can just get a Hearthead playing more cards than me, because like I'm just relying on these haymakers every turn, but if I miss a turn on a haymaker, like the game can just slip away fast. So I have some concerns. Like I think the same thing goes for like Stence's deck. He's just got many more options and things of that nature, and like Kurgar might get out of hand, and I don't know. I think overall my deck is like decently positioned, but I guess that's something to see. I haven't obviously never played against a deck like this, or haven't played much against this either, so I don't know. I guess I can get into some predictions at this point. So I think, working backwards, I think for my deck, I think overall I want to give myself the edge against Alpha 5's list. But again, I could easily see this deck overperforming what I think it's capable of. Wouldn't be surprised at all. Louis' deck, that's a tough one for me to predict. I would think, I feel like a lot of his cards don't matter, but then some of them really matter, and then that one's a tough one. Like, because if he just draws his ramp as well, like it's kind of tricky. I have more pure card advantage with like triple Helix Mana Storm, and my deck's definitely slimmer as well, so I'm more likely to see the Reapinsos than he is. So I think I would want to pick myself as a favorite, but obviously if I don't draw an Iron Will tree and he just draws like a bunch of discard, but even then, like if he just discards us both and then we both go down on a bunch of resources, like I feel like because I have like 7 pieces of card advantage to his 3, I'm probably top decking better more often. Yeah, it's a tough call. That's a tough call. Yeah, 7 pieces. Yeah, because I have like 7 pieces of advantage to his 3, and my deck's slimmer, so like the density is also higher. For that reason, so it's like virtually more, I guess, if you want to think about it that way. So yeah, it just comes down to like if his discard just picks off my win conditions, and then we get to a late game where I'm actually lower than he is on those, like that could be an issue, but. Yeah, it's really tough to theory that one out, but I think I would probably pick myself as a slight favorite. Against Darksteiner's deck, I have some worries. If he goes wide enough, like it's just some of those boards that get out of hand, like my Shield Blasts aren't going to do much about. Like a Tendril Grasp isn't actually that good against his deck. Like a Root Trap, I mean, like it can deal with an Apple. Like it's also not like most of these Shield Blasts aren't going to do much. I'm going to be relying on kind of like a Haven to come down, Andromeda to come down early, which can be really hard to play through both of those, and just kind of going at him and then just hoping like a timely Shield Blast can save me a turn, I guess. So most of these matchups are going to be pretty tight. I might just say Darksteiner is a favorite in that matchup, but I don't know. Mono Nature, I think, is actually favored against me. If I draw enough chump blockers, like Full Metal Lemon's really crucial for buying time. But again, like the Shield Blasts, my Shield Blasts aren't actually that good in the matchup. It's really tough for me to deal. Like if I just draw Lemons and Lyris to buy time, even then, like a single Andromeda is like not too hard to play through for Mono Nature if they get out ahead fast enough. Yeah, I think I'm a dog in that matchup. I just have to not train my brother in that matchup, and then maybe I can get away with the win. Don't give him the pro tips. But yeah. Yeah, I feel like I would be an underdog. And then against Andros, the light dark mid range. Keeper of Laws is a super big problem for my deck. Like I'm super heavy on spells, which is kind of whack. I don't know why I built that way. It seems a little sketchy, but luckily there's only one Keeper of Laws deck in the field. He's also got the discard, which is problematic, but I just don't think he presents a quick enough clock against me. Yeah, like he's got some play against my Havens with like Stalker and Trox plus Stormspark. The Vang's not particularly great. Lyra can be nice, just tapping down like my own Lyra or something. He's got the Screeching is a really nice answer to Iron Will Tree. Agrics can refill a board, but I'm not really actively killing his creatures that often, so it's like mostly just going to be coming down as like a really expensive vanilla creature. So I think overall like his deck is a little slow. Probably a little too slow to do much, like as you'd kind of expect. But if he has like a really nice Lost Patrol into like Keeper of Laws draw, I think that could definitely pose some problems. So it's going to be somewhat draw dependent, but I would probably pick myself as a favorite. So like overall, I think I would probably have a decent chance in this field to have a positive record. 3-2 would probably be like a fine guess. Like I could easily see like losing to one of these control decks and then losing to one of these aggro decks and then probably beating Andros, but it could break anyway. Like I think a lot of these matchups will be close. Every player is pretty strong. Maybe not my brother again. I feel like he's maybe played like less than. No, that's probably not fair. He's probably played like maybe 100 matches in his life. Not to slander him too much. Like he's gonna be good. We'll see. But yeah, I think overall, like I'd probably post a positive record, but remains to be seen. Alpha's list. Again, tough to parse that control matchup. I would probably pick. I mean, I want to pick Louis. Like he's got more discard. The Cephalia doesn't matter. Probably doesn't matter too much. Like it's obviously a problem card, but as long as he doesn't go they're both going to be playing pretty low resource, I think. But Alpha 5 does have like a lot of just advantage stuff. Yeah, and it could be tough to contain a Kurgar because like it's not like my deck where I'm playing with triple cast. Like he's just got Storm Sparks and Havens and just 3 Terra Pits. I mean, I could definitely see it going wrong for him. Yeah, that's a tough one to call. I think they're both strong players, and yeah, that's really tough. I don't know. I feel like Louis' deck is just a better deck in general, but I don't know how this matchup plays. I might even go with just like the fact that he has more advantage cards. Yeah, but his late game's worse. Well, not even, I don't know. He does have like a higher ceiling, I guess, but like a Haven Resolved is pretty hard to deal with. Incineration is pretty good too for like containing any board with Agrics. Yeah, I'll go with Louis in that matchup, but I could easily see it going the other way. Yeah. I guess Iron Will Tree is pretty strong too. Yeah, I would probably go with Louis, but kind of a tough call. Against Darksteiner, I definitely think Darksteiner is the favorite. Like, just such a pretty consistent, lean, powerful, aggressive deck. I think a lot of the Shield Blasts here, like, he doesn't have too many. Like, what is this? 4, 7, 9? Yeah, like 9 real Shield Blasts in a 51 card deck. Probably not going to cut it. Obviously, if he sees them, they're great, but like I've touched on, like Tendril Grasp not always even the most amazing. Like it's good if they're gonna try to present lethal against you, I guess. Like it can wipe a bunch of guys away on like a regen turn. But even then, like a lot of these are kind of mid. Um, yeah, not the biggest fan. Like Artichoke can blow out a game early, I guess, but even that, like if you're not converting the Artichoke with much, um, it's a bit sketchy. And I think the win condition can take actually, especially through like triple Artichoke, triple Root Trap, triple. I guess Tendril's not too relevant against Kurogar, but like a Kurogar win condition seems a little bit slower to turn the corner and defend yourself than something like Haven Andromeda. So I think he's leaning really hard on the darkness, but as I touched on early, the darkness has to be kind of like has to be one in the right position. Like if Darksteiner has a really strong position and the Swift regeneration and like darkness is probably not going to be good enough, even though it can answer that board. So yeah, I think I would pretty clearly pick Darksteiner, but I mean yeah, just like a well-timed Mesmerize that picks off like a bad apple, buys enough time, and then if you can just like hit a clunky draw from Darksteiner and like yeah, just a shield blast at the right time into Kurgar that like just vomits out a board, then obviously that's pretty nice. So you could, I mean, yeah, I think most of these matchups like they're probably gonna be like nothing's gonna really go crazy beyond past like 60% favorite for anyone. I don't think. Um, well, in general, I don't know. There were probably some of these matchups do, but I think for the most part, like anyone could win any match, like to a reasonable degree. But I would definitely take Darksteiner, and I'd probably take Gareth's Mono Nature deck as well. Even with the limited defense, like I just think, yeah, it just Boulder Fist can be an issue, like just breaking those boards that this deck can set up, just like playing a little bit passively and then just setting up a Boulder Fist, obliterating the field, and then just kind of going in for shields again. Probably not enough Shield Blast to really adequately defend. I mean, Bloom Warden's really nice for blocking. Grudge Weaver can buy some time too. Grudge Weaver's decent. There's some stuff this deck can do, but yeah, I mean, if Mono Nature has a clunky draw, but it's kind of hard to like not have an Evo. Like again, like Alpha 5's leaning really hard on these Mesmerizes, but like a resolved Anjak's going to be really tough to beat. So I would probably take Mono Nature, but I don't know. There could be some player skill that comes into play there. We will see. And then Andros, this is another matchup. Like this is one where the Keeper of Laws aren't as strong, like against as they would be against me, because like as we saw before, Alpha 5, his list is really creature based actually for the ramp. Like he's just got the Sprouts, but then he's not playing Mana Storm or Verdant Helix, or well, he's got the one, but he's not like going heavy on those cards. He's just playing he's relying more heavily on these creature based advantage options, which definitely reduces the impact of Laws. Like obviously Laws still insulates you from a lot of these creature or not non-creature shield blasts. Diminishes the impact of something like Mesmerize, but Alpha 5's list is definitely a lot more creature based than others. Absolute Darkness can also do like a really good job of clearing pretty much everything that's not like the Agaric Serpent stuff. So that could pose an issue. Yeah, I think just like the ramp, a lot of the advantage cards. It'd be a really interesting matchup to see play, like how Andros approaches it. Does he go for like a beatdown or plan? Does he try to wait a little bit passively, use discard to pick apart Alpha's hand, and then go in with his creatures once he builds up a position? That's probably what you want to do. That makes sense to me. Just like build up a board, maybe go like ideally like play like a Lost Patrol into a Laws, into like a Spire Puppet or some manner, and then drop a 6-drop, and then maybe start beating down. And then if Alpha 5 is able to answer with like a Terror Pit or Grip of Despair or something along those lines, then you can drop Agarics to rebuy the stuff that he's dealt with, and then I feel like you can probably get enough pressure to go through. And then another nice thing to note too is that like if you can get him down to like 0 shields, then at that point, like I mean, Stormspark can do a really nice job of closing, because I mean he doesn't also have like really any way to deal with a Laws. So if you can just sit behind a Laws for a while and then just close with Stormspark, That could be nice. Also having access to Storm Spark so you don't just like die the turn they Squillis can like, yeah, I mean, maybe that's not the biggest deal because they just kill you the next turn, but it's got some stuff like, yeah, like because you can rebuy the laws, like you can often set up a laws in play because like the darkness kills it, but then you just aggregates it back, right? Like, so he's got a lot of laws. So I don't know, it's interesting. I mean, the instinct is you just kind of take the heavy control deck over like the mid-range kind of low stuff, but I mean, he's got some decent stuff. It's just a matter of kind of seeing it. Like if Andros just draws the wrong half of his deck, like if he just draws a bunch of Grudge Weavers and Bone Blades and Pits and Storm Sparks, like some of the clunkier stuff, Serpents, too many egg, like there's ways he can draw. Like Lurking Skull Cutter is probably not the direction you want to go beating down with that card. Like if you draw the wrong half of the deck, like you can definitely, like you're just gonna stumble and probably fall too far behind. But if he has the right draw and plays it well, I think he can definitely win. For the sake of it, I'll just go with Alpha 5 in that match, but I could easily see the right draw beating him. So I think overall, like I predict a losing record for Alpha 5, but again, like one of the things I said earlier, I can easily see this deck overperforming. Like it's easy to focus on like the kind of, again, in my words, the suboptimal win condition here, but I mean, there's still a lot of good tools, like good Shield Blast, good advantage cards, good interaction. If he just draws it in the right order and then just plays well, and like he can easily have a chance. Like he has decent chances in all of these matchups. I just think it's probably going to go wrong for him more often than not. And I'd probably think 2-3, maybe 1-4 is probably around the range I would go for his list. But again, I think to be honest, like I think for everyone, it's probably going to be 3-2, 2-3 territory. Like I don't know if it's probably going to go more that direction where everyone's kind of at parity with each other. So Louis' deck against the other three, against Darksteiner. To be honest, I predict Darksteiner for this one too. Like Owl is not the best card at actually maintaining the board because like obviously it can clear Bad Apple. I mean it kind of depends, right? Like if he's got just a field of Pineapples and Renegades, like the Owl can clear them, but it's not even the biggest deal if he loses those. Especially like even if you have like Owl or if you have Bad Apple plus Renegade, like they're both going, or not both of them, but you're at least maintaining some advantage in that or in that way, and then you've also already like ramped a bunch, and you don't really need to keep that Bad Apple in play, so it's not always the most devastating card. Like it can do a good job of managing the board, but it's still a little bit passive in the sense that you're just kind of dropping it as a removal spell and then just chilling, and like just playing removal spells isn't the best plan of attack to beat this kind of deck, because it's just set up to generate so much advantage that just like even though Major Owl is like a pretty good removal spell, still not like going to line up the best. But the creature triggers also help mitigating stuff. Absolute Darkness is a little bit iffy, obviously, in the face of Swift Regeneration and just how the deck plays in general, but it can, if you catch them on the right board, it can be really devastating. Yeah, the win conditions, I mean, obviously if you resolve them, they're going to be good, but I mean, the deck can do a decent enough job of like playing through, if it has enough advantage, it can easily play through like an Andromeda and even a Haven, like it's not too big a deal. But I think the big thing is like the discard spells can be really crucial coming down at the right time. The blockers can be nice for buying you time as well. So I think like Louis has tools, but I think I would overall still go with Darksteiner in that matchup. But it's kind of close. It's definitely close. Against Mono Nature. Yeah, like the discard is a huge improvement over my list in that matchup as well. Super crucial. Underworld Stalker's nice, can be a bit slow at times, but he's still got the blockers. I think the extra red removal is not too great, to be honest. Major Owl also not too great in this matchup, as long as Gareth kind of plays it well. For the most part, I don't see... I mean, actually, well, Major Owl just being a chump blocker is still kind of enough to buy some time, and then if you drop it off Haven, it's pretty good, but... Like, again, it's got tools. I think this is another kind of 50-50-ish matchup. Personally, I would probably favor the Mono Nature side, but I think Louis is probably the much stronger player, so I could definitely see it going his way. Yeah. I think I would say that. Like, a Resolved Awaken can just completely win the game. Yeah, I'd probably go with Louis, but it's going to be a close match. And against Andros, again, like, Andros has the Keeper of Laws, but with the Major Owls, it's even harder to kind of press with his list, like against like Underworld Stalker and Major Owl. Underworld Stalker being like a big problem for an Agric deck as well. Vang again also not lining up too well. That's really unfortunate. Like Andros definitely he went with the 3 Vangs so that he could really test them out and see how they do. And yeah, they're this is one of the least well positioned they are that they could be, to be honest, which is a bit unfortunate for Vang, but yeah, I think again, like, I'd just take the control deck over the mid-range deck. But there are some draws that he can stitch together that can be pretty good. Agric's being sticky, but I mean, Absolute Incineration is an even better card for board controlling than Darkness. I mean, it can't answer laws that often, but still, like, it's just, you have Ow to kind of follow up. So, yeah, I would take Louis' list in that matchup. So yeah, overall, I think Louis has a decent chance as well of posting a positive record. Like, I feel like he probably splits, like, takes a win against one of these controls, maybe a win against one of these aggros, and then probably beats Andros as well. So I think he has a decent chance of going like 3-2, maybe overperforms and goes 4-1. Maybe he underperforms, goes, like, again, they're all going to be within that range, but I think Louis has a decent chance of posting a positive record. Darksteiner's deck, I think, is pretty strong. Like, I think he's got good chances against all these controls, and I think against Mono Nature, he's also the favorite. It's definitely a close... I don't even know. I think his list is pretty favored with the 9 Shield Blasts. Swift Regeneration is really hard to play through once you get it going. Yeah, I think Darksteiner's a favorite there, and against Andros, I think he's also a favorite. The big thing, though, is this is like the one matchup where Vang is like really, really strong. Like, just being able to really contain the early game and also be kind of like a proactive threat that can clock the veggie deck, or not the veggie, the regen deck is going to be really important. Gives you play, obviously, against Swift Regeneration too, maintaining those boards, but at the same time, like, if Darksteiner's regenning, he's got a bunch of advantage already, and then if you're not dying that turn, then you're going to be in a bad spot regardless, and like, you'll probably have some follow-up. So clearing the regen board's not always going to be the most like crucial thing, but it's still just a really strong card in the mid game that helps them kind of turn the corner. So again, like, the discard spell is really key for picking away those regenerations, picking away the bad apples, and then having like the 5-6 drop threats that you can kind of turn the corner with, I think is really nice. Even Serpents to be able to kind of generate some shields can be good too. But I don't know. It's hard to say, because in general, like, when I've played these kinds of decks against against these regeneration and veggie lists, these dark light mid-rangey things, they usually get crushed, to be honest. Even with the removal and discard, it's just so hard to beat regeneration resolving. But Vang might be the key to that. So that's really the X factor because I haven't really played enough with Fang against those decks. But I think overall I want to go with the regen list, which definitely paints a favorable picture for Darksteiner. I think he probably has the best chance to do the best. Like I think he has the potential for the best performance of anyone so far. I think he could easily go 4-1, maybe 5-0. I think he's a pretty good favorite against Andros and Gareth. I think the Louis match could give him the most trouble, followed maybe myself and Alpha could each pose him a problem. Like maybe if he just catches the wrong end of variance against the 3 control decks, then his tournament could get tanked. But I think in general, like I'd expect him to maybe win 2, maybe one of these, maybe just one of these. So I think overall, I think like 3-2, 4-1 is the range I would go for Darksteiner, which is kind of above, like a half step above where I would, or maybe a full step above where I'd expect my performance to be. I think definitely a good deck for this event. Gareth on Mono Nature. I think Mono Nature is also a good deck. I think against Andros, this is also, I mean, Fang does a really good job actually too, just containing, like, when the Mono Nature deck goes wide, has a bunch of residual bodies in play, and it's also beating you down with an evolution. That's really scary, and like Fang can at least manage those residual bodies, and then Lyra can manage the evos. Serpents can create some spots where, I mean, I don't actually really love the Serpents in this list. Like, it comes down after the Agrics and does some stuff, but you don't have really that many blockers. I mean, you have the Lurking, so if you drop it, play a shield creature, it's decent. Yeah, he's got tools. Like, the discard is super crucial for just picking apart Andrax, and because if that card resolves, it's really, really tough for these kinds of decks to beat it. Same with like setting up a Boulder Fist. If they just get their advantage chain going, I mean, Boulder Fist just really craps on these decks. But I mean, with, again, like that's like one of the benefits of like having the 5-6 drops is you can really nicely play that mid-range game where you just interact a bunch with Spire Puppets, Mesmerize, build up a board of like some cheap creatures with like Gloom Hollows that can buy you a little bit of time, Underworld Stalkers, things like that, and then you just drop a 6-drop, and with only the 3 artichokes, you can pretty quickly clock and kill a Mono Nature deck. So I do like that aspect. So I think Andros, being a strong player, I think can definitely pull that one out. Like, his deck just I think he across the board probably has like the worst matchup spread, but at the same time, like, he could just beat any of these decks with the right mix of cards, which is most mid-range lists, I think. But he'll be like, in his tough matchups, he's leaning really hard on like laws and the discard spells. In most matchups, I guess. But like, I think in general, I would take the Mono Nature list, but I might still take Andros in that matchup to beat Gareth. So like overall, I think Gareth, like the Mono Nature deck would do pretty well. I think he could beat. Like, I think he's going to lose to Darksteiner, maybe do okay against Louis, probably lose, do okay against Alpha, maybe, probably beat me, to be honest. Yeah, just based on his like lack of experience, the fact that he's played the least Kaijudo of everyone, I want to give him a losing record, maybe say he goes like 2-3. Yeah, I don't know. Hard to say. Again, a lot of these matchups are going to be really close. Andros, as we've kind of covered, I think he also, just by the nature of the deck, unfortunately, I think it's not the best field for mid-range. Like, Nature and Waterfire Nature Regen are 2 aggro decks that are probably better than the average aggro deck against these kind of mid-range lists, and then 3 heavy controls is also not what you want to see. So I think by the nature of that, I'd just predict a losing record for him. Like, I think similar to Alpha 5, where I think I see like a 1-4, 2-3. Maybe overperforms if he has like just good draws, which anyone could do in this event, obviously. But I would predict overall, I think Alpha 5, Gareth, and Andros are probably going to be the lower end. and then Darksteiner, Louis, and myself as the high end. But if my brother is secretly a master of the game, he could actually be up there with Darksteiner in terms of performance. So I don't know, that he's kind of the wild card, to be honest, because if he decides to put some time into learning and preparation as well, he could actually go on a tear, but we'll see if he's dedicated. But I guess I've talked a lot about the decks, so that should probably cover it for today's video. So as I touched on earlier as well, there's going to be a lot of matches, so I'll try to get a number of them, try to feature every deck at least once. Hopefully it's not all from my side, and hopefully I can get like some different varying matchups as well. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what comes out on top, how everyone does. Hopefully it's not just a mess of 3 2s and 2 3s, but it probably will end up being that. But we'll definitely see how it goes. So it'll be really interesting. I mean, 6 decks, none of which play Piercing Judgment, none of which play Herald of Infernus, none of which play Bottle, actually, which is also kind of crazy. I feel like Stenson, even myself, we probably could have both found Bottle as a Shield Blast. I was definitely thinking about. It's in my stack of cards that sits with this deck, IRL. I just didn't have that ability to pull the trigger because I haven't actually tested it. But just throwing a 1 of Bottle doesn't seem like it's the worst Shield Blast in the world. Probably maybe above average. I don't know. Yeah. Same for Alpha. I mean, when you have triple Kurgar, like, you probably want to play a Bottle, just 1 of. Makes sense to me. So yeah, that's interesting. Like 3 or maybe the 2 most degenerate cards, Herald and Bottle, not in here. Only 1 Keeper of Laws deck. No Piercing. Yeah, like kind of a weird metagame, to be honest. So we'll see how everyone does. I think everyone showed up with a deck that they either enjoyed playing or wanted to test. So yeah, it will be cool. So as always, thanks to everyone for watching these videos. Hopefully I can get some guests on in the future again. Had some issues recording. But yeah, we'll see. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.